I'm going to talk about handling gear, setting up gear, checking the gear, breaking it down, and cleaning. The first thing we need to go over are tanks. When you carry a tank, never carry the tank by the knob. That will bend the knob and damage the valve. When you carry a tank, always put the pressure on the inside of the valve, which means that I will hold it like this. Next thing we want to check the O-ring in the valve. The O-ring should look brand new. If it has any nicks, scratches, or whatever, it will probably leak. Never leave the tank standing up unless you have control over it, whether it has gear on it or not. It can fall over, damaging the tank, the floor, or someone around you. So, lay it down when you're not working with it. Next, we're going to go over our BCs. We're using a back inflation wing with a 6-pound back plate and a harness. Notice that when I carry this, I only put the weight on the webbing. You carry with the harness webbing or the webbing that's used to hold the tank. Never hold it by this handle. You also never lift it with just the wing, because either way can damage the wing itself. That's how you hold the wing. If you need to lay the wing down, you're going to lay it down back plate first. What this does is this doesn't put any weight on the wing. Never set anything on the wing. Your regulators lay beside it. Your fins lay beside it. Anything you put on the wing can pinch it and damage the bladder inside. I have it laying down like this so that the back plate, which is 6 pounds, doesn't pinch the wing. If I lay it down like this, it'll actually put pressure on it. If I stand it up like this, I'm pinching the bottom of the wing. You always want to think about it and be real careful with these wings. Let's compare this wing to a more common BC, which is a jacket inflation. So you have a wing here, a harness that conforms nicely to your body. All of our inflation, all of our buoyancy control will be within this wing right here, which is mounted on your back. Here's a standard jacket BC. You slip it on just like a jacket, tighten up the waist strap, tighten up the chest strap. This whole jacket inflates, so you have inflation in your front and your back. Pros and cons. This jacket, when you're floating on the surface, will help you float more heads up because you have inflation in the front. So it won't push your face into the water. So when you're on the surface, you may be a little more comfortable, at least if you're not used to the gear. Con is with this inflation in the front, it won't be as easy to stay in good trim, because with the other wing, all the inflation is in the back, and it'll help you stay horizontal. If you look at how this connects to your body, it's a very loose connection. If you compare that to the harness on our wings, not only does it tighten up around your shoulders and waist, which will be a better connection in this jacket, but you also have a crotch strap. So this is much better connected to you. You're much better connected to your buoyancy, so it doesn't shift around as much. A con with this, since all the inflation is on your back, when you're at the surface, until you're used to the gear, it can be a little bit hard to stay upright. Another con with using this backplate wing is this is a 6-pound backplate, which means you're always wearing 6 pounds. With this, if the BC is empty, I bet you it's a little bit positive. So all the weight you wear will be in your weight belt, which is a ditchable weight. With this, you always have 6 pounds you can't ditch. So in some situations, you may be a little bit negative. Notice that the inflator hose is held in place with a piece of bungee. What that does is that way, not only does it keep the inflator hose from getting away from you, but that way you always have a bend in the inflator when you're dumping air. If you ever took the inflator and pulled it straight out, you can cause damage to the bladder inside of the wing. And this is one of the most common forms of damage to bladders. Next, what we're going to do is wet the BC. The webbings here are going to stretch when they get wet. What we want to do is stretch them before the dive so they hold the tank firmly. Otherwise, if they get wet, if you don't wet them until you start the dive, they can loosen up during the dive and the tank can slip. We also want to check the BC for any leaks. With the BC laying on its back like this, the back straps are wet. Now I'm going to push the BC underwater. I'm looking around the wing. Now the bubbles have settled coming out from between the material, the outside material, and the bladder. I look to see if there are any other leaks. I'm specifically looking at, I want to look at this rear dump valve underwater and make sure it's not leaking. Because if it's leaking, it's going to be letting the air out of our BC during our dive. Now I'm going to flip the BC over and look at where the inflator hose connects to the wing to make sure it's not leaking there. We shouldn't see any leaks where the inflator hose connects to the bladder. Remember while you're doing this to be gentle with the wing and always handle it with a piece of webbing. Next we're going to put the BC on the tank. We're just going to put the straps over the tank like this. When you put a BC on the tank, you want to think about how the weight of the tank is going to affect you. If you wear the BC high, more of the weight of the tank will push down to your lower back, forcing you into a heads-up position. What you need to do is try and put the BC evenly on the tank so you have as much weight pushing towards your head as you do to your lower back. This is going to put the first stage right behind your head. Some people are uncomfortable with this, but you can get used to it. That way you also know that the valve is right there within reach. Now we're going to tighten the straps up. So take them out of the buckle like that. You just pull to tighten it down. And you're going to feed the strap back through the buckle. Now the buckle just comes over like so. Now, lay everything down tank first. Next, we're going to check out our regulators. When you take your regulator set up, the first thing you want to check are the second stages. So I'm going to pull off the primary and second stage. I want to check the mouthpiece. First thing I'm going to check is the mouthpiece and make sure the bite tabs aren't ripped or bitten off. So if you pull back a little bit, you'll be able to see any tears. Next thing we're going to do is a vacuum test. As long as the first stage is either still on the hanger, off the hanger with a dust cap in it, or on the tank with the air turned off and not pressurized, you can do this test. What I'm going to do is breathe in on the regulator. I shouldn't be able to. What that means is the diaphragms in here don't have any holes in them. If, when you do a vacuum test, you pull in air, that means when you're underwater, you're pulling water instead of air from the tank. I'm going to do the same checks with the backup second stage. So I check the mouthpiece, and now I'm going to do a vacuum test. Now I'm going to look at the hoses for both second stages and make sure they aren't cracked or split or anything like that. Next, I'm going to check my console. Both the depth gauge and the pressure gauge should read 0 right now. If you have a max depth indicator, which is this red line right here, go ahead and reset that to 0. And all that does is show you the max depth of your last dive. Now I'm going to check this hose, make sure it's not cracked or splitting. Check the inflator hose, make sure it looks good. And now I'm going to take the first stage off of the hanger. The air intake should always be covered up unless you're just taking it from the hanger to the tank. If it's not on the hanger or the tank, you need to set it down. Make sure you put the dust ball or cap in place. Next thing, we want to check the air intake and make sure it looks clean. Now we're going to put our regulators on the tank. The second stages go to the right side. The pressure gauge and inflator hose will go to the left side. Notice I put the dust cap and the number on the opposite side of the knob. And the yoke will fit over the valve like so. I'm going to tighten up the yoke screw just finger tight. Do not tighten this down forcefully. Next thing we're going to do is connect the inflator hose. Pull back, push it in place, push that down. Now we're going to turn on the air. Take your pressure gauge, point it down the floor so it's not pointing at anyone in case it cracks, and gently open the tank. We're going to just gently turn this knob all the way over. It will not damage the valve. Once the knob stops, do not tighten it open. You will damage the valve. Now I'm going to turn my pressure gauge over and check the pressure. If you have less than 2,000 psi, let your instructor know. You'll probably have to fill the tank or swap it out. Then clip off your gauges so they're not dangling. Next, I'll check my primary second stage by just taking a breath. This may squeal, but that's just because the regulator is dry. As long as you can take a breath, it's fine. Notice that I clipped the second stage off so it's not dangling. Now I'm going to take the octopus and take a breath. Alright. Now what we need to do is check for any leaks. When you pick up this gear, never lift it by the first stage. That will damage it. Always lift either like before with just the inside of the valve, or you can also use the webbing. When you carry the gear, make sure nothing dangles. I have everything else flipped off, so I'm going to hold on to the octopus and lift up the gear. I'll take my backup second stage first, dip it down in the water. I shouldn't see any bubbles coming from it. I'm going to do the same thing with my primary second stage. Alright, once the bubbles have cleared out of the housing, you should see this. And I don't. So I'm looking at the pressure gauge to make sure it's not bubbling. Then I'm going to dip the inflator mechanism and make sure there are no leaks coming from it anywhere. Alright, that was just water filling in the gaps. Now we're going to check the first stage, the valve, and where the first stage connects to the tank. One of the most common places for leaks is where the first stage connects to the tank right here. If you have a bad O-ring, that will leak. I'm also checking where the valve is connected to the tank. I'm checking the first disc, the knob, each one of the connections on the first stage. I just want to make sure there are no air leaks. Now we're ready to take the gear out of the water and put it on. Now we're going to go over rinsing off the gear. Notice that I've left the gear set up and I still have it air on. That'll be the easiest way to rinse it. I'm going to stand everything up. I keep control of the second stages to make sure they don't slam onto the ground. And I'm going to rinse everything off. I'm going to start with the first stage. We want to get the chlorine off of everything. Now I'm going to follow each hose down. So I follow the high pressure hose to rinse off the pressure gauge. Now I'm going to follow the inflator hose to rinse off the whole inflator mechanism. Face down to the backup second stage. When you're rinsing on the second stage, I put water in the mouthpiece, run water through the exhaust key, and run water through the face right here. We want to get all the chlorine out of there. I'm going to do the same thing with my primary second stage. I'm going to rinse off the tank. More importantly, the straps here. If we don't get all the chlorine off, the chlorine will degrade the gear and it won't last very long. So you want to rinse it thoroughly. Now I'm going to rinse off all the material in the wing. You want to get off as much of the chlorine as possible. Now I'm going to rinse off the back plate and the material covering the back plate. Now the harnessing. Got to take good care of this gear. Now, the last thing we need to rinse is the inside of the bladder. What can happen is chlorine will get in there. We want to rinse it out with this fresh water. So what we'll do is remove the inflator hose within the bungee here. I'm going to hold down this oil inflator button and put water inside. As long as I'm holding that button down, water is actually going inside the wing. We don't need a whole lot. Now we're going to take the first stage off the tank. We need to turn the air off. Notice that I'm just doing it with my fingers. And once it stops, I'm not going to push any farther. Do not forcibly tighten this down. You will damage it. I'm going to remove the inflator hose from the inflator mechanism. Unclip the pressure gauge of the BC. Unclip the primary second stage, and I'm going to use this to purge the pressure from the system by just holding down the purge button. Just hold it down until you hear all the air come out. I'm going to gently set it down and never drop the second stage in the deck. Loosen up the yoke screw. Take the first stage off the tank. Notice I'm tightening down the yoke screw. Alright, as far as how to orient this. The first stage body is always on the same side as this hole. The two second stages should always be on the same side as this opening. This is the correct way to put the first stage onto the hanger. Now I'm going to lay down the gears so I don't have to worry about keeping control of it. The pressure gauge comes straight up and clips onto a zip tie that's on the hanger. Our primary second stage is the longer hose. It's going to come across and connect to this button. Our backup second stage just comes straight up, and the mouthpiece is held by this button. This is the proper way to put your regulators on a hanger. Now we're going to take the BC off of the tank. Put the inflator hose back through the piece of bungee. Undo these steps. Remember, when you pull the BC out the tank, you pull by the webbing. Never lift by this handle or pull on the wing. I'm going to lay the tank down while I work with the BC. We put water in this BC. We're going to use it to rinse out the BC, and then we need to get the water out. So first thing I'm going to do is orally inflate. Notice I'm pressing the oil inflator button. Now I'm going to take that water and rinse it around inside the BC. To get the water out, I'm going to use this rear dump valve. Now, in order for water to come out of here, this has to be at the lowest point. Right? So hold this up. I'm going to keep going until water quits coming out. Now, that doesn't mean there's not any more water in there. Usually what it means on the first try is you inflate and do it again. Sometimes it can be hard to make the dump valve the lowest point, so it may take a little practice. What you need to do, inflate again, and make sure there's not any water left in it. If there is, dump out the water and inflate it and dump it out until you get all the water out. If there's no water left in there, leave it inflated because you always want to hang this up inflated. There, now I got all the water out. Now, I'm going to take the BC, put it on the hanger. Notice that the first stage is pointing away from the BC. Also notice that the waist strap is buckled and then it's run through the crotch strap so nothing's dangling. Before I disassembled my gear, I made a note of the pressure that was in it. If it's 2,000 psi or above, the tank just goes back in the rack. If it's below 2,000 psi, it goes in front of the blue fill station to be filled. I have over 2,000 psi in my tank, so it's going to go back in the rack. If I had less than 2,000 psi, I would set it standing up in front of the fill station, which is that blue box. Next, there's a number on the gear. I'm going to hang up the gear according to the number on the walls to make sure they match up. So the gear always goes back.